welcome and happy Sunday if you're joining us today. I am enlightened and just overjoyed to be joined by my brothers this morning, the Dr. Charles Alexander, the Mike Jones, and Jerry L. T. Kwame Christmas. Jerry L., did you break your fast?
Yeah, I did. Then I
Okay,
just started it back up again.
okay. Well, I think we'll talk about that later.
All
But
right.
this morning, we need to have an entire show on that. But this morning, I want to talk. We are blessed, Dr. Alexander's work and by Mike Jones and Kwame, a lifetime of work. And we're going to have this conversation this morning because Black History Month for us is just not a moniker. It's something that we practice every month, but we're going into the ramifications and some of the impacts of that this morning. And we're going to be led in this discussion by Dr. Alexander because after all, it was his sweat equity and brilliance that really lends itself to this topic this morning. Dr. Alexander, with no further ado, please.
Good morning, good morning, good morning. And so, as Attorney Fields saying, yeah, every month is Black History Month, and and some of these things we say, and but we say these things, this range of things, and we're going to get to a range of things as we go through our conversation today. This range of things that we end up saying, we say these things, and then we're surprised by the manifestation of the things that we say, which suggests to me that either we don't believe it or we don't understand it. So, so to start with, I, I came up with this presentation I did a couple of weeks ago that kind of speaks to, so like if we take the concept of menticide, Bobby Wright's concept of menticide, which essentially is literally to kill the mind and the desire for learning and the desire or the ability to identify and understand your cultural knowledge and history. That's fundamentally what that means. If Bobby Wright was right, then we should be seeing what we see today, right? And so people like, what's wrong with folks today? This is what menticide looks like. Now, if we're seeing it, then that means it is. And then if it is, and by definition, it's a cognitive structure, mental side. That's killing of your mental ability. Then we ought to be able to see this in the brain. And so, in short, we got a system. We talk about this all the time. We got fight or flight system, and our fight or flight system, is fueled primarily by stress hormones, cortisol. And so when that system is working right, then we have an acute stress response that then causes us to either fight or flee. That's it. That's all. That system is supposed to work anywhere from 15 to 90 minutes. It shouldn't take any more than 90 minutes um for your body to cycle through that process. So assuming that you're able to identify, orient toward the threat, and do what you got to do to manage the threat. And so you go from fight or flight to rest or digest. Okay. And that's what happens if you're not under constant threat. If you're not um no, that's it. If you're not under a constant threat, then that's what it is. Now, for us, we're generally under a constant threat. Why? Because we're second class people. Now, in order to appreciate this, you first got to accept that we're second class people. Now, I know people have difficulty with that because they be, oh, I ain't second class. Well, I ain't say you need to act like a second class person. I would say you need to accept the fact that you are an oppressed people. Well, I ain't oppressed. I'm able. Oh, okay. Part of the reason that we get the outcomes that we get is because people can't accept that fundamental right. Okay. And so while they are arguing what I kind of think is, indisputable, they're actually causing their systems to be overworked. Now, how does this impact how we relate to each other? We've talked on here before about the default mode network. So the default mode network is that part. It's the collection of different parts of our brain working together that help us to be self-reflective and self-referential. And then there's this other part I don't think we talked about on here, and it's called the theory of mind. The theory of mind is our ability to do that same thing, but in this case, is relative to others. So in the default mode network, the brain is thinking about you, as an individual. And in the theory of mind, the brain is thinking about others, the people that you come in contact with. And so, as we've talked about many times before, once we get to a point where that cortisol is constantly flowing through our bodies and our system is not responding in the manner in which it is, the manner in which it's supposed to, meaning that, it continues to pump cortisol and adrenaline and produce glucose, even when there is no threat. We're then vulnerable to dysregulation, and we start to see various forms of brain atrophy. We start to see our memories compromised, our ability to form and access memories becomes compromised because the cortisol eats away at our hippocampus, which is where our memories are stored, or at least processed. They get to be stored in a lot of different places in the brain, but the hippocampus is the primary brain apparatus that makes that occur. And then if those memories are messed up, then we necessarily are suffering from a perspective called neuroplasticity, because then our brains, we're not creating more linkages. We're not, we're not storing what we're learning. So we're not getting new synapses and new connections and da 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 da. Okay. And so ultimately, what happens then when we're in that space, because when we're in that space, we're literally in survival mode, because that's what the HPA axis is about. When we're in the survival mode, by definition, what's important to us is whatever we perceive to be right now. That's what's important to us. And so if we're focused on right now, then by definition, the default mode network can't be functioning, because its purpose is to utilize that information to think about tomorrow, to think about the future. That is the world of our imagination. That's part of what goes on in the default mode network. That's where we daydream. That's where we imagine. Again, that's where we have the self-referential thought and the self-reflection that helps us to go on and move on and, plot the course, see the course, plot the course, and execute the plan. All right. So if we're always in that space, that survival space, then of course we can't do that. Now, if we're always in that survival space, then also the theory of mind gets dysregulated as well. And so if we can't think about us, then certainly we can't think about, so if I can't think about me, then certainly I can't think about you. And so my sense of self is off, and my appreciation and concern for you, your thoughts and your feelings is off as well, because I'm worried about survival, right? So all of these things that we say they happen, and we say them because they happen. My goal is to make sure we're connecting the dots, literally. And so if we say, for those, so for folks who believe in the concepts of post-traumatic slavery, if we say that that's a thing, then it has to manifest somehow. And I'm saying to you that there's a significant body of neurophysiological research that helps us to understand that. Now, it's our job to then make that, make sense to the masses.
Dr. Alexander, once again, that's why I'm the only one that likes you. And, you just go too deep. No, but that's brilliant,
It,
brother. I
it
mean,
can't be too deep.
no, man, it was absolutely perfect. You took very, very complex issues and you broken them down into morsels. So, in other words, you can't think about yourself, you can't think about anyone else because you are in survivor's mode. A couple of things that to talk about and let's hash out. Again, I want to give the panel, I want to give our brothers an opportunity too, but real, real quick, let's define both second class individuals and what that looks like, because I don't think we understand that is not necessarily the pejorative that they are, that we're assuming. You move differently when you know that your army it is affected by a lack of resources. And also, is there anything such as post-traumatic stress syndrome, or is traumatic stress rookie? I mean, it almost seems like, almost seems like an oxymoron, because, the trauma is ever present. So, I mean, and the concepts of slavery still exist in a mitigated form. So I just wanted to have those, bring those two things to the forefront. And please don't spend much time on either of them because I want to hear from D. Mike Jones and Parker.
Yes, there is a thing called, post-traumatic stress, so we know that exists. I tend to struggle, in the context of this conversation, I tend to struggle with it, the title conceptually, much for the reason that you kind of stated in your question. So as long as we've been engaged with white folks, there's been PTSD. Right. So it didn't start in 1865 with the end of the Civil War. So this stress response has been present since we've been dealing with them. Now the other part of this, that we got to wrap our arms around. Many of us don't want to. I think the movie with what's the sister? The sister. She was like the leader of the Amazons and the homie. I just can't remember.
The Woman King.
Woman King, right?
Mhm.
So the Woman King is instructive because it kind of helps us to understand what was going on in pre-colonial and pre-Atlantic, transatlantic slave trade, is that there were kingdoms on the continent that were engaged in a slave trade, so to speak. Now, but what we have to understand is that in most cases, the overwhelming majority of cases on the continent, the trade wasn't clan based. Or certainly wasn't race-based, but it wasn't clan-based either. It was typically the result of war, so because there were resources at all, you have different factions, different folks. Another thing, contrary to belief, to popular belief, we wasn't all on the same page all the time. That just where you have people and you have resources limited or otherwise, you create factions and blah 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 blah. So, in cases of war or huge disagreements, there could be captives. So that would be one source of of slaves. Another would be people who kind of lived on the fringe of a society and could not afford to feed themselves, might literally sell themselves into slavery. So essentially, it was more akin to what we've come to know in Europe as indentured servitude. And then you have families that would do the same. I can't do nothing with this joker. Here, you take it. And so that would happen. Or you could be a criminal. That, to pay off your debt, that could happen. You end up in servitude. Now, the difference between that circumstance on the continent and what, we came to experience, or our ancestors came to experience here, is that your slave status was not predicated on the status of the mother. It was not a lifetime condition, and your ability to ascend through society was not capped or limited because you were held in such condition for some period of time. And so, lots of those people, certainly not everybody, lots of those people ascended through those various societies. They became, chieftains in their own rights, or queen mothers in their own rights, or all of this other stuff that we like to make up. We descend from kings and queens. No, we don't, because there ain't that many kings and queens. Everybody can't be a king and queen, so we don't all come from that. And so and so it's like regular people. But many of us came here. My whole point in that is that many of us came here already traumatized from whatever could have been going on in their particular tribe, nation, or what have you on the continent. Then we end up, with the slave trade. Then we come here, and then the thing keeps doing what it's doing. All of that is trauma. So the trauma don't start in 1865, and so that's part of my problem with the phrase called post-traumatic slavery, because it didn't start there. It was going the whole time, and whenever you traumatize, then you have it. And so I absolutely believe that we had folks all the way until, I think there's actually a date for the last person who was enslaved that died. And, I think there's actually some date for that person. That person had post-traumatic slave syndrome. That person, whoever that last person was, that was the last person to have it. The rest of us have trauma from living in the United States otherwise. So all the people who lived that 100 years of Jim Crow, trauma. Everybody who was, born, so like Mike Jones got Jim Crow, post Jim Crow traumatic syndrome, right? We don't have we kind of got it too. At least one of y'all do. One of y'all born before 65, right? And so, so whatever it is we think is the end of Jim Crow, then folks got that. And then everybody else has just got the PTSD that comes from living in this thing because it's traumatic. And so, yes, all to your question, there is a traumatic, we've had and continue to have a traumatic response to how we live. Now, if that isn't enough to establish the fact of the second question, Larry, I don't know what to do for folks, because you can only have that experience if you're a second-class citizen. And what it means to be a second-class citizen is that you can't vote, You can't go to school. You can't choose to worship what you want to worship, when you want to worship, where you want to worship. You can't, you're unemployed and or underemployed. You're unemployed or underemployed. You're uninsured or underinsured. You can't find, fair housing. You know, you're literally written into the Constitution. All of that means you second class. That's what it means to be a second class citizen. Now, if you can't appreciate how the term comes into being, then you probably can't appreciate that the term exists.
And
Meanwhile,
let's not get
you're
confused.
scraping and survive. You're scraping to survive. I'm sorry. Go
That's,
ahead, brother.
we don't want to confuse citizenship with personhood.
That's true. But that's the nature of this thing. And for anybody again who would choose to disagree, then I think that person would be hard pressed to justify why we die disproportionately of high blood pressure, diabetes, cancer, range of respiratory illnesses, um, why we're unemployed and underemployed, uninsured, underinsured, why we are still, you know, like why are we having a reaction to the fact that fewer and fewer black kids are getting into med schools and other graduate schools? I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And so these are dots that have to be connected in order to understand where we are.
And we've got to do a much better job of really defining what citizenship is, because we think it's a permanent status, and it is not.
It's as
And
good as the ink
we
on the pen that signed
that
the 13th Amendment and
for
subsequently the 14th and subsequently the 15th.
for today, that is correct. Mike Jones.
Yeah, Charles, that was great, and
Thank you,
uh,
Mike
like
Jones.
and like Larry, I love you, and I can specifically say because you expand my vocabulary. There are things that you think, but you don't know how to explain and say or conceptualize, and I have you made me a lot smarter over these years we've been doing this, and first of all, I want to thank you for that.
Thank you,
And
brother.
and when you were talking, I was making some notes, okay, because I didn't want to randomly lose the thought that you triggered, and the thoughts that you triggered. And here's the first one, and then I'll go to my main point. One of the things that we get confused about is we don't, if we got a black theory of the case, it's not a theory of the case, it's multiple theories of the case, because we have no agreement on what's the black predicate of reality. Okay, because the theory of the case flows from whatever the predicate is. And our predicates are all over the place. You and I are in the same place. You get there through a different door or travel a different path. You're a professional psychologist, and all your stuff makes sense. I'm a barbershop philosopher, political theorist. Okay, and that's the door that I come through with this. And the one thing I thought about what you said about what happens um, when you can't think about yourself, you can't think about anything else. And we started this conversation about Black history, and we've always missed Woodson's fundamental premise, and that is if you can control how man thinks, you don't have to worry about how he's going to act. And his backdoor statement, you don't have to send him to the back door. He'll go looking for the back door because that's where he thinks he belongs. And so for me, my issue, my starting point is kind of like a philosophical, not kind of, it is a philosophical standpoint. And it's the existential question that Kierkegaard famous quote as who am I, where am I, how did I get here, why wasn't I consulted? Okay, those are existential philosophical questions, and when you answer them to your satisfaction on your terms, then you get pointed in the direction that starts to address the psychological traumas that you're talking about. And for me, I turned to philosophy because I always have, but the way Black folk practice religion, God is not an acceptable answer. Okay, that fundamentally the question of who am I, where am I, how did I get here? God ain't the answer for me. Okay, and I think it is a fundamental flaw in our psychological intellectual makeup. Okay, I'm not saying you shouldn't have a theory of God, but if you make God the agent for everything that happens to you in this existence, then you've given up your agency and no longer taking responsibility for yourself. And that is, if it was something that good that happened, we say all the time, God is good. If it don't happen, it must have been God's plan. So you mean divine intervention oversees your agency as a human and a human being. And to me, that's more, that's what makes it possible for white folks to oppress you because you've already locked yourself into an oppressive relationship with God. Now that's not the point that I'm trying to really raise. I just wanted to give that as a context. So the reality, I think, before we can even understand the issues you raised, you have to address the existential philosophical question. Because the reason you can't deal with, or we can't deal with the whole notion of second class citizenship, because we never answered the question right now in this moment, who am I? Where am I? How did I get here? Now, that's a philosophical question with an empirical answer. And once you accept or define that reality, then you start to logically ask yourself, what am I going to do about it? Who are these other people? What are they to me? And all of a sudden, it makes sense. Neely Fuller Jr. If you don't understand white supremacy and racism, everything you do understand will confuse you. Literally, when you can't answer the existential questions, okay. When
It's
you,
blurred. It's blurred out. Doc,
yeah,
read
I
the
don't know
title.
why it won't cooperate.
yeah.
Read the title. What is that?
It is United Independent Compensatory Code concept.
Okay, gotcha. That's his book.
That is Neely Fuller, the
But
United
but when
Independent Compensatory Code System concept.
but what I'm saying that education systems fail us because they start with false assumptions. And what you almost have to do is it, I believe not almost, I think you do have to do that. You have to philosophically, intellectually strip your stuff back to your mental framework or mental housing, intellectual housing, back to the studs, and then build it out again. It's almost like pledging 100 years ago. Okay, we start. You don't get to bring your stuff to the frat. Okay, you starting at zero. Okay, and then we'll tell you, we'll build you into this. It's what the army does with soldiers. But then that gives the predicate that you're organizing reality and life around, that becomes foundational to who you are. And that's how you begin to understand the world. If you don't ask those questions, then everything and answer them to some level of satisfaction for yourself, then everything you describe is going to happen to you. And that's why, we were talking in the green room, and that's why I gravitated to Albert Camus and the myth of Sisyphus. The relationship usually between us and the universe is absurd, but it's truly an absurd relationship between us and America. Don't make any sense. And no matter how hard we push that rock of black progress in America up the hill, it's always gonna roll back down because that's who this place is. But if you read Camus and you learn to understand the myth of Sisyphus, you don't trip off having to roll the rock up the hill and it's gonna roll back down, because on the way back down to get the rock again, you're free. You are now conscious to figure it out, think about it, and then you get a chance to reject the absurdity of the whole thing, and now you in control. And you still got to push the rock. The rock's will still fall down, but you're defining the reality in which this is happening. And your oppressor is not your superior. He's just a fool that's stronger than you at the moment.
But you have to recognize those truths, and you've got to not to want to be a part of this thing, and
But you
to
got to start.
understand
But you got to start with the question: who am I?
that is correct. That is
Okay. I
correct.
mean,
And,
and
and
everybody has to ask that question.
everyone has to ask that question, but we also have to have that consciousness that Doc is talking about. We have to have some consciousness and understanding where we are, because you very easily could say, who am I and how do I get out of this, and want to aspire to be a part of this thing. And
But
this thing
but
is
but
not
but
good for us.
but
And
Larry, if you understand what the question really is, it's who am I in the world? To Charles's point
That
at the
and
open,
that
in the
to
world, not
that
not
is
in
correct.
America. Who am I in the world? In
And we
reality,
can't, and we're so provincial that we
right?
can't see past. If we growing up in University City, we used to call folks with a narrow vision skinker Whitson drivers.
Okay.
They never went any further any further east than Stinker, and never any further west than Woodson. That was your whole world. But there's just too many people that are impacted that way. And so, Mike, your point is extremely well taken. Uh, Kwame, uh, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this mess.
I think everybody's right on point with that. I think that is the hard thing, is trying to figure out where we stand in America, because we don't take it seriously that we are second class citizens, and how we look at worldwide, because we're so bought into the American system, and that's the way that we have just indoctrinated, and that's the only way we know how to move forward. And I think Dr. Alexander is right on point, is that, we all over the place on the theory. And the hardest thing is to get us on one page, in looking at this thing. And part of it is the whole controversy, or not controversy as much as it is how complicated our situation is, with both how we viewed in the world and how viewed in America, along with being a second class citizen. But, we have to come together and move forward on processing these effects on us, because that was keeping us from moving forward. But we just don't have leadership that is, addressing these issues with us as a community where we can all agree on it and work on it. Because we need safe places where we can talk about, excuse me, our mental health, as Black people. And in order to, I think, overcome this, what I look at is that, you have to really intellectually immerse yourself in Black history and Black culture and have a real understanding of, what our history is in the world, what our history is in the country, what this whole struggle is about. We talk about all the time that you don't win unless you resist. We don't have any resistance right now. I think that's a real problem right now. And I think that's because of a lack of intellectual structure and not immersing ourselves, along with the fact that Mike talked about our educational systems. So many of us, send our children to the enemy to be educated. So how can we possibly expect that they're going to come back with that type of revolutionary ideas and they're not even being educated by us? So overall, everybody's on point. I just can't figure out how do we get all of us on the same page on these issues, and how do we get our leadership on the same page on these issues? Do we have to keep being bombarded by this in order to make people realize it, or they just going to ignore it because, it's coming at us harsher and harsher right now?
Gerald, I'm not sure. I mean, excuse me. I think that's the other piece, is that we think this kind of in an all or none kind of way. Everybody not going. That's just kind of fundamentally the nature of this thing. Because again, if we're not,
but don't we need a
we're not
majority
in the same
just
space.
use me one time? I know we're not gonna all get in the same space like 100%, but we can't get to a point you think we can get the majority in that space?
I don't know that we don't have the majority. I'm just saying that so again, if we kind of, so if we say all of these other things exist, right? So if we say that the vestiges of, the historical trauma exists, and then that's layered upon the present trauma, then we necessarily have X number of folks who are literally worried about the next 5 to 10 minutes. They're not thinking about whatever it is that you're saying is necessary in order for blah, blah, blah. They are literally worried about the next 5 to 10 minutes. Now, if you say to me that I think where we can find agreement is that, those, so if the four of us have time to do this, then we necessarily have time to be a blessing to somebody else. Right. And so I do think we have to be thinking like that. I don't think.
And I agree with you on that. Can I say this one point? Like, for example, you absolutely right on that. People are living from minute to minute where we may not be living that same way. I have just an example. I'm due to go to trial tomorrow, right? I have to get my client today to get him some clothes for trial tomorrow. He's living from day to day. We in a whole different world. We both Black. We both are subject to the same treatment in this country. Everything. Just we looking at it though totally different. He looking at it from, like you said, minute to minute, day to day. I'm not looking at it that same way, but you're right. We do have to find some kind of way where we that know are doing more to bless others. And I think that is a problem that we're not doing it.
Just what you just said. That's what that looks like.
Yeah.
Right?
Charles,
go ahead, Mike John.
Yeah. To that point, because you just made it, Gerald just made it. Here's what I would say to Gerald's question to you. It ain't on us, it's on me. Once I become aware that I'm responsible Okay, I can't say, well, I'll go, send me when all y'all understand. Once I understand, once I
I
understand,
get
then I'm obligated to hold up my hand and say, send me, because now
it.
I know. And once I know, I can't unknow. Okay, so
Yeah.
there's not but one way forward. And y'all know I ain't a church guy, but y'all got a book that's got a lot of lessons in it.
And that's
Was
one of the
he?
lessons.
Yeah, that. Wait a minute. And I think it was when they were confronted with this. I think it was Joshua, but Larry can correct me, or Gerald can correct me if I'm getting this wrong. What did Joshua say? Well, I don't know about y'all, but for me and my house, okay, me and my house.
We gonna praise the Lord.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. That's so rather than making that some ceremonial or religious statement, think about it as a metaphysical concept,
And,
intellectually. Okay.
and again, Mike, that's another Nelly Fullerism. He's made us
Okay.
say it like this can't start at a we level. This
Right.
start at the me level. This starts
Right.
at the individual level. You have to, you know, as you said, once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
So
And
once you see it, you have to act accordingly, and you have to and then back to the biblical reference, you gotta get you right, and then your house right, and then and even then, it ain't about going out and proselytizing. It's about finding like minds,
And wait a minute. And living now, what to the best of your ability, what you understand.
what you understand. And
well,
to your point, Larry, that's where it becomes a difficult piece, is because so once you realize that this thing, all it's gonna do is grind you up, chew you up, spit you out. You got to decide when you want to be spit out. you want to be spit, you want to be spit at or spit out, because
Wait a
spit
minute.
gonna
And,
happen.
and Charles, that's Sisyphus pushing the rock up the hill.
hmm
That's what that is.
I got that lesson from a country preacher with a fourth grade education that was one of the purest Pan-Africanists that I knew, and he really reduced that whole thing to a really cliche saying: "If not you, then who? And
Oh,
if not now, when?" And taught me that when I was 10 years old, and that has to stay with all of us.
And then psychologically, Larry, you have to get yourself in tune and ready to deal with that also. Because as you know, for us, every time you take on a client's problem, and you know, so many of these issues interact, with our clients, because we deal with pretty much 100% Black clientele. Every time you take this on, you take on a little piece of that, Dr. Alexander. So, if you got 100 clients, and then you take a little piece of every one of them, because you can't really take on their issues, their problems, without taking on a little piece of it. That begins to worry on you also. I think that's why lawyers have such a high rate of substance abuse and suicide, because of taking on those problems. And I think that affects, Black people as a whole, and those that are conscious. Because when you become conscious and you start taking this on, it is a heavy lift. And it's a
It's
lot
very
of work.
much a
Gerald,
heavy lift, and so again, to like go back. I mean, not go back, but to again, so we look at like mental health from the church perspective. Now, last year before that, all the way, as long as anybody on here could remember, there has been somewhere on somebody's Sunday that there has been a person speaking across the pulpit telling you that if you depressed, you don't let the Lord. Because how can you be depressed when you got Jesus? We've had that, and which has been part and parcel of why we've struggled with what mental health and mental illness is because it's not all the bad white folks. Some of that stuff is us, and some of that stuff is this thing that I mean, so we
And it's called life.
it's yes, and so and so and if we have if we had this place that's supposed to be a place and a source of refuge, telling us that not if you feel this, let's work this out, but instead, I'll come to you wounded and beat up by this thing, and you tell me because you know the thing is getting the best of me, I don't love Jesus.
Wait a
How
minute.
that don't that
So what you just described,
You're right. That doesn't make
no,
sense.
what you just described is the religious equivalent of crack.
And there are entire industries that are set up for us to tolerate the abuse and the status quo.
Mhm.
And that there is absolutely no difference between what was done on the plantation and what that pastor stated. Because essentially what that pastor stated or those pastors stating is that it's not the systems, it's you. And it's another form of victim blaming. That is, so we have got to do a better job of identifying this. At this point, we have to uh, visit everything and rid ourselves of these things that have been traditionally um, liabilities to us and have been active in weathering. Because that is a factor. For me to sit there and tell you that you're the problem, when in fact you're looking at the face of a hostile system and you're looking at all of these modalities that you mentioned earlier, and I see you abbreviated this from your earlier presentation, and it does not lack in substance nor quality. But even went into further detail about how this sort of thing impacts the brain. And we just got to do a better job of that. But I am concerned that we're going to lack the consciousness to do it because we seem to be just totally bereft agency at this point, Doc. And
well
I
the
mean,
thing is constantly, to your point, Larry, the thing is constantly eating away at our brains and bodies otherwise every day. And so, so again, like it, so so you tell the unhoused or the the person living in literally dilapidated house, and don't worry about that because this he got something more for you, because my father's house has many rooms. And so you telling the person right now who's sitting outside in the cold, don't worry about being cold today, because when you die, you live in a mansion. What kind of sense does that make? And so, but that
And
that
that's the problem too, Dr. Alexander. We can't get anything till we die. All
that's
glory is only come in
all.
death. You know
Yes,
what I'm saying?
and so
And
that's
nobody's been able to come back and tell us anything about whether or not that's actually
so
true.
that becomes so that's where we're separating our spiritual life from religiosity. All right, so and so the machine is doing what it can do and what it does to separate our spiritual life, our spiritual being, from the point of view that, again, if I'm living in survival mode, I don't care about myself, let alone you. Right? I only care about myself to the degree that I think is necessary for me to meet this immediate challenge. I don't necessarily care how I meet this challenge because I'm in survival mode. That's how the substance abuse piece becomes an option. I'm at one and the same time trying to deaden the impact of this and somehow get through. But really, what I'm doing is expediting ultimately the deadening. I'm gonna die of that situation one way or the other. And so That's how we have to start to look at this thing. But because we don't really, it ends up being like this twofold thing for us. Like, so we don't want to go back and look at our history. What we want to do is go back and find superstars. So we don't really want to talk about why what Dr. King did was important. We want to talk about Dr. King. And since we only want to talk about Dr. King, we really don't want to talk about um uh uh what's my man? Can't think of the brother's name right now. The brother from New York that came and help King solidify the Bear Rustin. So we don't really want to talk about Bear Rustin. We want to talk about Dr. King. But if there's no Bear Rustin, there's probably no Dr. King, right? I mean, there is a Dr. King, but he's probably not moving the way that he's moving, right? And and so
And if there's no A. Philip Randolph, there's probably no
and
Bayard Rustin.
we're not talking about a Philip Brown. I mean, we're not talking about any of that stuff, right? And so but like the odd thing about that whole period of time, and people actually have this particular conversation, but really have no idea of the context for it. So right now, we got people talking about, we ain't really used to talk about mental health. That's part of how they won the Brown decision. The whole reason that we had a Clarks involved, Kenneth and Mamie Clark, was about the psychology of Black kids. That's part of how we determined that separate but equal was having adverse impact. That was a psychological profile of Black kids. Right? So we don't understand these things. We don't want to go back to understand these things. And part of why we don't want to go back to understand these things is because they're traumatic. I get it. But we're not going back to revel in either the heroics or the trauma. We're going back because we need the information in order to fight the fight today so that there is a tomorrow. But that's the tough thing about the whole piece is that, you well, part of the reason it's a hard piece is that we still got folks who don't want to acknowledge that we are at war. Right. And so that's kind of what that damage to the default mode network means, is that we really don't understand the here and now. It's distorted. Our because our hippocampus is impaired, then our default mode network is impaired, and our frontal lobe is impaired. Because all of that is impaired, it's kind of hard for us to kind of see ourselves in the right now, and we're scared to talk about the before, and so we can't even deal with the what's to come. That's kind of how all of that looks from a neurophysiological point of view, because we are dealing in a survival mode.
And if you don't have game film, you're not going to be as effective as you need to be.
Right.
You're going to continue to reinvent the wheel. You're going to continue to think that your opposition is something that it is not. They are either making it insurmountable or light. So I mean,
You'll keep making the same mistakes over and over and over because you never saw nobody ever, and you can't watch the film by yourself, because when you look at the film by yourself, you actually you don't see what happened. You see what you consciously thought was happening, and you'll project that into the film. What you need is somebody sitting next to you that stops it and say, let's talk about that for a minute.
That doesn't have your bias confirmation mindset.
That does not have your bias confirmation. That's why I love talking to you guys, man. Shit, I've been struggling with that concept forever, man. Bias confirmation. White folks got a name for that shit, huh?
So I have a great example of that. So Friday night, Howard played Michigan. So I'm watching the game with Harold Ellis, and so Harold was like, "That is disrespectful," and in my first thought, I mean, in my first take on it, I didn't know exactly. I knew the player he was talking about, but I didn't know exactly what he was calling disrespectful. And and so, because my thought was it was that they was letting this guy shoot, and so he's like, that's disrespectful. So in my mind, he's saying it's disrespectful because they letting this guy shoot. Then he goes on to say, this guy is a wing, and every time down, they covering him with the center. That's disrespectful. So they was letting him shoot, but that's not what Harold was calling disrespectful. What he was calling disrespectful is that ain't nowhere in the world that you gonna put a center on a wing if you think that wing can go. So obviously, they ain't got no respect
Wait a
for that
minute.
wing player.
Charles, that's the same thing as Larry Bird objecting to
It's
you
the
putting the
exact
white
same
guy,
thing,
you
right?
putting the white,
Yeah,
you putting the white boy on me?
yeah,
Come on.
yeah. And so in that case, we are watching the same thing, but this guy a pro, so he sees even what seems to be the obvious from a slightly different space and point
Right.
of view than how I see it, right? And so, but it's that way for everything. You see, I mean, we've all seen in the course of our conversations where our expertise in a particular conversation gives us a particular point of view versus the other three people. And so, or when it's Larry and Gerald versus the other two people. And so that's why it's got to be interdisciplinary. And so, and that's one of the pieces, so yes, I did pare this thing down, Larry, but that's one of the things that I recommended in terms of how we manage these types of things. And this kind of gets back to how we're taught. We get exposed to all of these different, disciplines when we're growing up and we're going to school, but we're really taught that all these things are just separate. That's all they are. They're just different disciplines, not that they somehow, you know, correlate and have some impact altogether. Like, I mean, so clearly, even even in the most biased ways that U.S. history is taught, so even once we account for the biased nature of it, like you probably never remember learning about. So probably the only scientific uh, conversation that you ever had in your U.S. history class was the invention of the cotton gin. That was probably the only time that there was any kind of correspondence. You know, any interdisciplinary teaching was when they taught you about the cotton gin. You know,
And but Charles, to that point, perspective is everything because my father was born and raised in Alabama, big farm plantation kind of thing. And I remember as a kid in the barber shop, him and somebody, one of them barbershop conversations, debates and stuff, and him saying, who was it that invented the cotton gin?
Eli Whitney.
Eli Whitney, right?
You know,
He said Eli Whitney didn't invent the cotton gin. And he said that because there's nobody from back up east or back up north who had never seen a cotton field, never picked cotton, could have come up with an idea like the cotton gin. He said, as far as he's concerned, somebody black who was a slave figured that shit out, and the white folks took it from him
Mm-hmm.
and put a patent on it. He said because he couldn't have done it, just not.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't have even imagined what a cotton gin would do. Because he didn't know the problem that you're trying to solve.
And I mean, and actually, that's a footnote in
And what
Harriet
I'm
Beecher
saying,
Stowe's book.
wait a minute, and I'm saying that story not because it's true, because my father could have been wrong, but he had an alternate theory of the case that worked for black people, as opposed to the Eli Whitney theory of the case that white folks had. And so it is figuring out, it's having your own theoretical speculation about how to interpret reality as opposed to picking up somebody else's theoretical interpretations of reality. Because whatever you come up with will serve your interests. Whatever they come up with is going to serve their interest. And if you buy into their theories of reality, you're automatically at a disadvantage for the rest of the time you spend around here, thinking about yourself the way they think about you.
And that level of self-reflection, that level of research, that level of independent thinking is rarer and rarer today.
And it's
Yeah.
automatically compromised. That and you know, our ability to do that en masse is compromised for the reasons that we've discussed. You know, your default mode network and your theory of mind is compromised. So because your brain is compromised otherwise, because you have this inordinate amount of cortisol and adrenaline running through your brain and literally creating brain atrophy.
Hey, Charles, and I know, I'm sure you guys are old enough that actually at the undergraduate level, without it being a major and stuff, every philosophy department in America had a course called Theory of Mind or Theory of Knowledge. And all you had to do was be curious enough to take it.
Okay.
Well, nobody gonna make you take it, but it was there.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that huge numbers of credentialed people are functionally illiterate at an intellectual level, which is the major problem we got.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Which was kind of like what Larry and I were talking about in the green room and what it looks like to be on campus right now, where I got a bunch of kids who come with, 1,600 SAT scores and, 3.9s and 5.2 GPAs. They have these, inflated scores. They're not intellectuals, right? They haven't literally been taught how to think. And and so that becomes a huge and just a huge challenge. And so that's what it looks like for me in that space.
I don't know if you guys sent me the reel or my son, but I'll send it to you all. But it was this brother in the car, and he was talking about pickup basketball. And he was talking about, he had the gym open and there was two guys in there playing one-on-one. And he said the way kids learn how to play basketball now is there's always two elements every time they play. There's a coach and there's a referee. He said, so I'm in the gym, they're playing one-on-one, and they're looking at me, say, when you gonna make the call? Okay. He said, I'm not calling anything, y'all playing. And so his point was, what you learn playing pickup is how to play through contact. I mean, there's a whole physicality of the game that you pick up when ain't nobody, when you're learning to play, where there's no coach and there's no referee. That the game becomes organic. Shit, you like what you don't get to call, that's the defense call it. I fouled you, take it. Okay? And normally the response to that was, no, that's all right. And what you're saying is, not that you didn't foul me, but that wasn't the reason that I missed the shot. But the whole point is playing through contact, playing through physicality is a life lesson. Okay, so you don't show up at work saying, "Well, ain't they gonna call it? Where's the DEI guy? Man, fuck all of that. We playing on the road in an all-white school, and we ain't nobody on the bus but us, and we ain't gonna get no calls from the referee. We knew that when we came here. He gonna remind you. He reminded us of that before the game started. He gonna tell you again at halftime. So I don't want to hear you bitching about that. Figure out how to win the fucking game, man.
To, and
And if you lost, it was what they cheated. No, they didn't. Yeah, we knew they was cheating. We lost because we didn't play good enough. Because we had to beat the cheat. That was the game.
and and for me, so Larry, you know where Ivory Crockett Park is,
Right.
and so we call that it's Bell Court. So it's a street called Bell's where basketball court is in Webster Grove. If you didn't play on Bell Court, you probably wasn't starting at Webster Grove playing basketball. From 78. That's when black folks started starting on the basketball team. From 78, all the way through the 90s and probably early 2000s. If you didn't play and learn how to play on Bell Court, you probably weren't going to start at Webster. Right now, Webster Groves has they won state last year. They probably still ranked after this stuff, even though they got bumped. They probably still ranked in the top 10, I would imagine. Got a top 5 player, right? Nationally, he's probably a top 10, top 5 player nationally. I have no reason to believe that kid even know where Bell Court is.
Right.
Right.
I think Rayshawn Simmons and Michi were the last guys that played at Bell Court.
Rayshawn lived around the corner from the court. His grandmother lives. His great grandmother lives a block from the court.
Right.
His uncle runs the court.
Right.
his uncle runs the court. So that's his piece. That's Brother Simmons' piece.
And so just look at what you just talked about. You just talked about the legacy being handed down and the interruption of it.
Right.
And a lot of that, and that's partly our fault. We've got to, because what we've done is turned over our kids to a climate control thing that we thought was better. And that really is endemic of what is going on now, specifically what you just talked about on campus.
I have no idea who this kid is. He might be the best. He might be the best player in the basketball. I have no idea who he is, who his people are, anything. But I know that young man that you just spoke of, right? I know his whole family. I know the whole nine, right? So that's a gone thing, and and so that's kind of how that starts to look, and so that's what that real looks like for me, Mike Jones. That's what that real looks like for me.
And here's the bigger point. In every city in urban America, anywhere, St. Louis, y'all had one in Webster Groves, because Webster Groves ain't that big. But I can name you 5 or 6, 7 places that you had to play in if you wanted to play, if you wanted to be a player. And LeBron James is the only 6'9", 250-pound superior athlete that I've ever seen play basketball and turn around and look at the referee for a call. Now you think about it.
Mhm.
6'9", 250 pounds, best athlete on the floor in his prime, looking for a call.
And so to that, Mike, I say so.
Right.
I'm watching the
That's my
games
point.
on.
What you were talking about.
Yeah,
Right.
and so I'm watching the games. I watch. Oh well, I was watching halftime of that Michigan
St. Louis shoe?
Howard game.
Oh, how?
The
Okay.
Michigan Howard game. I was watching halftime, and so they had Jamal Mashburn in the studio. And first thing that come to mind is that guy easily top 5 player in the league if he's in there right now. Easily.
Right.
Nobody in the league can cover. Nobody in the league can cover Jamal Mashburn right now. Not a single person. Because he ain't worried about the referee making a call.
Right.
In fact, he don't want the referee to make a call because he gonna punish you.
Because he was going to score the basket. And if you make the call, you calling the basket off. Shit, I don't need to foul.
Because he's scoring with that contact.
Right.
Yeah. So, but
So
that's
yeah.
what we're looking at. Yeah.
And when you and to expand that metaphor, we learn to be black playing pickup, playing through contact, understanding that, so that by the time you playing white folks in the real game, fuck a referee. You know what? We ain't getting no call. We ain't looking for none. We ain't think we gonna get no call when we got here. I was on the state board of education with brother from Kansas City, and we used to talk about that when I first got here. He said, and we talked about black schools playing white schools. Somebody always, all your guys gonna be in foul trouble, and in the game they fouling out. He said they had a high school coach that never started his best 5. He started 2 of his best 5 and then 3 off the bench. He said because the refs are going to call early fouls to get everybody in foul trouble, but they don't know who none of y'all are. So I'm going to keep them on the bench. So y'all can pick up them early fouls, and then I'll bring them in for the rest, as a substitute. So the sales was going to be better. So, but that's a teaching moment. Here's what they going to do. Here's how we go counter that. We go play a longer game than they playing. They think they got us because of this, but because of the racism, they'll never figure out that we smart enough to figure them out and what they gonna do and compensate for it. That's life experience.
Yes. And
that's the teaching moment that we missing right now, Mike.
Right.
I think you put it right on point. You know, we can't play through the contact, nor do we think about we have to go in beating the cheat, because we're not even thinking that they cheating, or we're not teaching our children that they cheating from the onset, that you have to come there to beat the cheat and you have to play through the contact. That's the kind of information that we got as young people that these young people are not getting. They're not getting that structure or that information at all. You look at what happened here in St. Louis last weekend with the 314 day, when you had these children just out here acting absolute fools from what? 15 to 30, just out of control. That, they were so concerned about last weekend because they didn't know how this weekend was going to turn out with the NCAA coming here, because they acted such a big fool last weekend. But there's no direction, there's no instruction coming at all.
And it appears, and let's not forget that we were on the blacktop in Chuck Taylor. Our guys
Right.
in baseball were barnstorming in uncleared off fields. It seems as if the further we get from the lash, the softer we get. And I'm not saying that the lash is
you
anything.
are saying that. Quit using that is a terrible metaphor.
You don't like that metaphor, Doc, and I understand. But we've gotten just a little too bought into this thing.
But some of it isn't. So some of it. So So yes, I think what we have to do is a better job of being able to parcel out what is the manifestation of what is the manifestation of being bought in, and what is the manifestation of the damage, and where do those two things come together, right? So
And
essentially, we have, we got like these, it's like a Venn diagram, right? And so we got to look at where the, so we clearly got some sellout. So because we're in election season, so that person who is taking, so you guys know that Illinois was one of the featured spaces,
Right.
during the elections, right? And so we come out of this. Julia Stratton, she wins the Democratic primary, for the Senate seat.
for the Senate seat.
And then this other sister named Donna Miller, she wins, for it was the Democratic primary, but she's gonna win because the seat is a solid Democratic seat, for District 2, for the House seat. And then Toni Preckwinkle, she won for the county president. So Cook County Board president, I think that's been literally a black seat for about
Just Jerry Butler.
yeah. So yeah, Jerry Butler, and then Strozier, and then Strozier's son, and then Toni Preckwinkle. So that's like 40 years, right?
Right.
And so that whole time, and so we know that she was gonna win, and so then the issue becomes these other two. It used to be Jesse Jr.'s seat, so there was reason, and it was, in spite of his history or whatever, it was reason to believe that he was gonna reclaim his seat, the seat that Donna Miller got. Well, Donna Miller is backed by AIPAC, right? And so I get it if folks don't have, if folks no longer have a taste for, for the Jackson legacy, I get it. But is that what you want? You want, when this woman goes to Congress, she's pro-Israel. She ain't got jack for you.
Wait a minute, hold that thought, Charles.
We did the same thing with Wesley Bell.
Wait a minute. And okay, hold that thought too, Gerald. Here's the problem. The problem is that black politicians are all upper middle class, bourgeois, soft ass black folks.
Mm-hmm.
Politics is a hustle. Wait a minute. Politics is a hustler's game. It's a hustler's game. And to max out on it, not only do you have to be a good hustler, you got to have some gangster in you. So I would be all right, given my pedigree, if you took the money, and I knew you was the kind of brother or sister that would take the money and treat AMAC the way gangster drug dealers treat college kids when they want to buy a lot of dope. Did you bring the money? Yeah, thanks. They say, "What the dope? Fuck you, man. You want to get out of here alive? Take your ass on home, but you ain't getting the money." So ain't nothing wrong with the double cross. What you gonna do?
It's what you gonna do. And so
what you gonna do?
But that's
see. So
my point with her,
yeah.
And my point with Wesley Bell, and this is back to Larry's point. That's the bought in part,
right?
So that's the bought in part of the circle, and so we got to figure out how we gonna deal with the folks who done bought into the system. But on this other hand, we got the folks that Gerald was talking about earlier. That's the manifestation of the trauma. We got to figure out how we could be a blessing to those folks. And so, but they not the same folks acting the same way for the same
Right,
reasons. And so
right.
we got to be clear on what when we're seeing whatever we're seeing, we got to understand what the particular thing is a manifestation
Wait a
of.
minute. Here's what I want you to be as a black politician. I ain't talking about elected officials because that's different. That's just somebody holding office. But I want you to be like Omar at the trial. Okay, that brother need to be in jail for killing that innocent civilian. Y'all ain't got no witness. Shit, I'll show up and
I'll show
testify.
up.
I wasn't even there. Okay, but if all y'all needed somebody to say you saw him did it, do it. Shit, I'll say I saw him do it. That's what I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about. And somebody say, well, you know you was lying, and so what? Now what? Now what? He gone. He said, now I could have done one or two things. I could have sent him to jail, or I could have done it myself. And I had other business, so I sent him to jail. And since y'all wouldn't come down here and lie on him, I'll come down here and lie on him. Ain't nobody gonna do nothing to me about it.
Yep.
Now that's
Well,
how you
let's
play the game.
And that's how you
That's the
play it.
game.
And we have no reason to believe, like we haven't seen yet. Like we haven't seen yet the bad outcome for the person who takes, money
Right.
from APAC, because they all take it and do what APAC asks.
Right.
Right. But so we now, we ain't seen folks take that money and lose, but we ain't never seen nobody take that money
And double cross them.
and double cross them. And so that person who takes that money, that person is a person who's bought in. And so I don't know what that means, brother attorney. That means you leaving. I was gonna ask him if he was leaving or if he was just letting us know he was in church. He had just put it he put it in the chat. And so I
Right.
wasn't know if he was leaving, if he gonna sit in church and listen to us, or what. But so attorney's gone. But so that's this is the thing that we're looking at. And so another thing that I came across again, like when we're talking about, just like the mental health issue, we've been experiencing trauma in this space for 400 years. So this thought that we just now starting to commit suicide, that is foolish to me, right? Now, what is more likely, and what is actually the fact, is that science never cared about Black suicide. So we weren't counting Black suicide. And much of whatever we count today, we just started counting. The only thing that we've counted for really a long time has been the census. Most of this other stuff we start counting in, the 50s and the 60s. But again, if we've always been traumatized, and we have, then we've always committed suicide. Now, we know from slave narratives
from the Middle
that,
Passage.
I was about to say, so we know that folks chose death versus the Middle Passage. So we know this, right? And so then, and we know that this happened in the dungeons also, right? So then it had to have happened once we got here. We know, that's what Beloved is about. Beloved is about a woman who chose to kill her babies instead of being sold wherever they was going to get sold and all that kind of stuff. We know that this occurred. And so we have to know that it occurred through Jim Crow, and it occurs now. But we act like it doesn't occur. Now, so why do I bring that up? Because I'm reading this book by Alvin Toussaint. Alvin Toussaint, he and this other sister, Amy Alexander, they wrote this book on suicide and mental health suicide and mental health crisis amongst African Americans. This book is published in 2000. So Alvin Toussaint says 26 years ago, we was at crisis. I'm not saying we're not at crisis now. I'm saying the crisis is not new. And part of the reason why it's a crisis is because Black folks keep acting like mental health is a thing of white folks. But again, it ain't both. It ain't. We've been through slavery and Jim Crow and whatever we calling this thing now, just fundamental white supremacy. It's not that this thing has come and done what it has done, and we ain't had an issue with suicide. We've always had an issue with suicide.
Charles, I'll suggest an extended dimension to whatever the mental health issue is now. What you were describing is what I would call the historical Black experience psychologically, and your suicide running from that. I think that's now compounded by what I consider to be a cultural collapse, breakdown of the macro culture that's the United States. So all the Black stuff is still in place, and now it's compounded by the meltdown of the whole society. That you watch a white folks go berserk because reality and the social order they understand is collapsing all around them, and literally, apparently, they were so desperate that they could elect Donald Trump a second time because they believed whatever he said he was go fix it. And you have to be delusional or totally high on something else to ever look at him and think he's the answer to any question that you might have. I mean, it ain't got nothing to do with your politics. That's just making an assessment of him as a human being, okay? And even Jeffrey Epstein said about Donald Trump. Now, this is going to be, to me, that was a hell of a quote. Epstein said about Donald Trump is he ain't got a decent molecule in his body. Now, if that's what Epstein thinks of you, shit, how terrible do you have to be?
Satan could be.
Satan, right?
It's the boys from South Park hit it on the head. I know you guys don't engage in animation, but if you ever get an opportunity to look at this last season of South Park, the political accuracy of these guys is really profound.
But and again, it's like so that this whole thing
I'm writing it down, Larry.
is falling apart. We can see it from our perspective that, all right, this thing is falling apart. This is what happens when blah, 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 blah. But the person that was already unstable,
right?
This is pushing that person further over the edge.
Right.
And then our problem is that we see, we're tuned in to that person who's dying in this context, but Black folks been dying in this context the whole time
we've been here. And
so in this book, so he published the book in 2000. He's noting that it was a twofold increase in Black suicide from 1980 to like 1994. Do either y'all remember Black folks talking about increase in suicide among Black children?
Yeah,
no.
But I started to pay attention to the fact that it was even happening Because in my historical experience, I never, growing up and all that kind of stuff, I'm sure it did, but it never happened at a scale that notice was given to it. And that's what caught my attention back then. Because
Mhm.
I tell you, when you're as old as me, what folks would say, damn, when did we start killing ourselves?
Right.
That's how
And black folks
noticeable
still say that. Yeah.
it was. Right,
And they still say that. Be like, when we
right,
start doing that, like
right,
we've been doing that. So the issue is science didn't care that but part of the reason, and because we don't do a good job of connecting the dots. Part of the reason that science didn't care is because historically we're underrepresented in science.
right,
And so if we ain't there, then it ain't being, it is not being contemplated. And so and these are all of the things that, that kind of occur, And so, so like even with Alvin Toussaint, it's really kind of interesting. So it's like most people only know who he is because of his affiliation with the Cosby Show, right? But when we had Mukasa on here, Mukasa said what? We had mental health workers when we was down in Mississippi. Alvin Toussaint was in Mississippi with us. Nobody knows that Alvin Toussaint was part of was providing mental health services to the people in the community. But who else? The workers, because they was all under assault and attack because of the movement. And so again, we steady. It's just how our minds. This is how this thing works. We get so disorganized. The Association of Black Psychologists started at the same time that the Black Congressional Caucus started. It starts in 1970, and so that same era, they were all thinking the same things in their respective, you know, areas of profession. Um, you know, when we hear white folks, white folks have co-opted, white social scientists who've decided that they're going to write about um, um, microaggressions. Microaggressions, that comes from a Black man. That's a Black psychologist who came up with microaggressions. What's his brother's name? But again, this is, and I just bring it up because, this whole thing about mental health, we're doing ourselves a grave disservice when we continue to act like these are new things as opposed to as the constant manifestation of, a constant manifestation of a historical trauma. I'm gonna get this brother's name.
And a historical program, as you look for that, let me just add, you often state that the fight is on several fronts. The fight is on several fronts because the war is on several fronts, on every front, scientifically, educationally, economically, politically, religiously. This adversary fails to miss an opportunity to assert their might. But go ahead, Dr. Alexander.
Dr. Chester Pierce, Chester Pierce, who like I think the Toussaint was as well. I think they're both Harvard psychiatrists, but it's Chester Pierce who came up with the phrase or term microaggression. But we think this comes from somewhere else. And again, I mean, these are things like it's not a new term. It wasn't a new term. And so like by the time we get to 2005, the sister DeGruy, Joy DeGruy, and she's writing about post-slave syndrome, post-slave trauma syndrome. We think it's a thing. It's chapter 2 of this book that I'm telling you about. Chapter 2 of the Poussin book, which is published again in 2000. Chapter 2 of that book is post-slavery trauma syndrome. So we've been contemplating these things for a long time. Akbar started writing about this in 1984, right? And so we've been contemplating these things since forever, and I'm sure if we look at, some of those early Black psychologists, I mean, we already know that just in terms of, being able to put the experience of slavery into mental health terms, we already know that Frederick Douglass was doing that in 1846. And we know that he did that in the other two subsequent books. So as long as there have been Black folks who've been enslaved here, there has been a Black narrative about the mental and emotional stress that this thing has caused. And as long as that has been occurring, we've been seeing various manifestations. We just don't always attribute it to the ongoing stress that is, caused as a result of white supremacy. I, for one, believe that the sooner that we understand things from that perspective, the better off we will be in terms of our overall mental health and well-being, because at that point, we start to look differently at whatever there is to get from this thing. And it kind of gets to what Mike is saying, that since we got to be here, and we do have to be here. We are not going nowhere.
That is
And
correct.
so
Double
since we
down on
got
that.
yes, so since we got to be here, we got to approach that thing in the way that Mike just said. Yeah, I took the money. Now what?
Now what?
But any position towards this thing contrary to that is surely going to hasten your demise.
Yeah, and we have got to look at this thing as the transaction that it is. I mean, no matter what. I mean, there, of course, are going to be those issues that you described earlier with respect to this Venn diagram, where our interest and well-being certainly overlap. But you have to understand the system in which you're going in. No one is going to berate anyone for making some earning an honest living in any name, but there's a person that should show up with full agency. And we have examples that are great, and we have examples that are not so great. And so that's where we are. I mean, I take my hat off to anyone that has been able to navigate corporate America. Both political aspects of professional life may very well be in academia, if not in academia, but definitely in the sciences in which you work in, and certainly the law and so forth. So we have there's a lot of credit that's due to us that we have to uh, be willing to accept, and not this benevolent disposition that we often have. And we just got to do a better job. If you could take us out with closing comment on something for us to focus on this week, and let's go ahead and wrap up the show.
Okay. Yes. So I got 2 book recommendations. I don't always do this, but today was one of those days, because this is actually one of my favorite books. And The United Independent Compensatory Code System Concept by Dr. Fuller. I think this is a great read. I think it's a foundational read. It's something that definitely can help you to right size the battle. And then after reading that one, you can get Dr. Akbar, Naim Akbar, Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery. And then after you've knocked out those two, I think that Lay My Burden Down by Alvin Toussaint and Amy Alexander would be a good place to go. That, you know, that should take an avid reader, you know, maybe a month, but most folks that should take you through June, you know, kind of reading and studying those books. But it will definitely help to give a better perspective on how our day-to-day is influenced by, you know, both the history of this place and our current experiences, our day-to-day experiences.
So I like
Repeat that one by Dr. Akbar again.
Chains and Images of Psychological Slavery.
Okay.
And if you you could Google this other one. Like, so if the earlier conversation about, you know, default mode and theory of mind are of interest, and then you might want to Google Menticide by Bobby Wright. That there's that article is floating around in a PDF form on, you know, in the world of, you know, search engines. But that's the kind of stuff that I think, you know, those narratives are good places to kind of start in terms of getting a good sense of where we are from a psychological perspective. Mike
well,
Jones, you were gonna say?
yeah, I want to say what you just laid out was extremely important. That to understand reality, you kind of have to be a thinker and a reader. I mean, fundamentally, especially if you want to put yourself in some kind of leadership, and we're all in some kind of leadership. We ought to lead dog on some sled team, but and you can't just fly by the seat of your pants. And we have developed a tendency to be intuitive about everything. Well, I just know that. And I'm going to tie that back to us in post civil rights, the not unsegregated, integrated America. Here's my assessment of American culture and intellect. Americans, and that includes now too many of us, but particularly white America, are the most intellectually uncurious, intellectually shallow, underinformed people on the planet for people who live in a developed country. That the average American you talk to, the average college educated American that you talk to, black or white, really can't tell you nothing other than about how they make a living. And their view of the world is this small. We've gone from being a people that had a profound intellectual pedigree that we developed. I'll say something I've said before. I genuinely believe that there's a black canon that explains the universe. Okay, that literally you can read, you can start with Douglas going through the entire catalog, and you would have, and you would be as informed as anybody on the planet, but you'd be informed from a black perspective. If you go to an American school I will guarantee you, you will graduate dumb as shit. You fundamentally not only won't know nothing, you won't even learn how to figure out the fact that you don't learn, that you don't know nothing, and how do you process and learn shit. It's what you said about those students at Morehouse. Now you guys were Morehouse inside of that context was an elite school. Now you got folks couldn't find their ass with both hands in the daytime. Okay, and that's the Americanization of Black America. And if you really want to know how stupid, how uninformed, how functionally illiterate Americans are, they chose Donald Trump. Now you could be as evil as Lex Luthor, but you would never choose Donald Trump to do nothing. Nothing. Wait a minute. Here's a man that was bankrupt twice in a casino. Casinos are designed, you can't lose money. Okay? They cheat. He couldn't even do that.
You can't cheat right.
He can't even cheat right. I mean, in a game, that people know they're going to be cheated when they go in. They go in to lose the money. Okay? They ain't even mad when they come out broke. And you couldn't do that right. And he got elected to do that. And here's a number I want you guys to leave us focused on. 35-40. That no matter how fucked up Donald Trump is on any given day, 35 to 40% of America supports him still. And when you realize that they're overwhelmingly Republicans, because his approval rating of Republicans is still 85, 90%. And when you look at the demographic of the Republican Party, almost nobody's Black, Asian, a few more Hispanic men than used to be, but still their minority populations are not statistically significant. So that Republican cohort, that 35 to 40% probably represents half, a little better than half of all of white America. So our biggest danger is not their mendacity, but their ignorance. Mm-hmm. And therein is the fundamental problem. Because even Thomas Jefferson, in the Notes on Virginia, as he's reflecting on a lot of stuff, said, now that's why he owned 300 people. But here's what he said. When I think about the history of my country or something like that, and I reflect on it and reflect that I tremble for its future, because God's justice can't sleep forever. So that's what Jefferson said. He said, you know, this shit is wrong. We're doing it because we make money doing it and all that kind of shit. But fundamentally, you can't justify it. And we go pay for it. Now, it ain't a white person. Here's an exercise I do all the time now, because I just like fucking with folks on this. And I've done it with white folks too. And that is, so you recognize this sentence? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Everybody will say, That's the Declaration of Independence, right? Thomas Jefferson. So I said, you want to know what did he write next? Literally next. And they said, no, I don't know. And these are PhDs, lawyers, doctors, educated folks. I ain't stopping the man on the street or the cab driver or the shoe shine guy. Okay, I'm talking to professional peers, and they say no, I don't know what it says next. I say here's what Jefferson says next. He said, and government is instituted among men to ensure those rights, and it draws its power from the consent of the governed, and basically to the effect, and when it ain't doing that anymore, there's almost a moral responsibility to change the government. Now, that's the vision statement of the United States. That's what the Declaration of Independence is. It's the vision statement. The Constitution is the mission statement. How you go do it. But here's the point. Nobody knows that. Now you live in this motherfucker. You've been to college. You're successful, and you can't tell nobody the premise of the founding document. There's no other advanced country in the world that can't tell you fundamentally what it means to be French, English, German, whatever. Everybody. Only Americans are completely ignorant of that. So to think that they ever go get it right, I mean, it's nuts. I mean, so it's profound ignorance. Okay, and because so it ain't even they're not even smart enough to be benevolent. Okay, they're just evil and ignorant, and the ignorance is more dangerous than the evil. Because if you was the evil genius, some shit you wouldn't do just because it don't make sense for you. It messes up the long term thing.
You still, if you was an evil genius, you would still do things that benefited other folks just because,
Right.
not because you cared, because
it keeps the game going.
yeah, I mean, because it just made sense to do it, right?
Right.
But these cats can't even get it right otherwise.
Because it's stupid.
Because they stupid. Now, but here's part of why they stupid. So, 165 years ago yesterday, Alexander Stevenson delivered the Cornerstone speech. And so the Cornerstone speech is the speech in which he says the difference between the United States and every other, or not the United States, but the United Confederate States, or the Confederate United States, whatever they called that thing, that the country that was to be the Confederacy was the first country in the world founded upon the premise of the inferiority of the African. And in that same speech, he said that Jefferson was wrong about God's justice.
Wait a minute. And Calhoun said, John C. Calhoun, who was really the intellectual father, I'm not going to just say of the Confederacy, but of modern America. My view is that Jefferson and Hamilton and Madison are not the founding fathers of it. They're the last Europeans in America because they're products of the Enlightenment. But Calhoun and Jackson, if you want to know who America is, look at the first generation of Americans who came of age after the Revolution, after the American War of Independence. That'll tell you who. And the reason he said Stevenson could say that is because Calhoun wrote that 10 years earlier, 50 years earlier. That's fun. That was fundamental. That Jefferson got the Declaration of Independence wrong.
And he
And,
got it
and
all. So right.
right,
So they said
wait
they
a minute.
got
And that's
yes.
in the book, and that's in the books, man.
Hmm.
I mean,
And so
if you was teaching antebellum history, American history in the antebellum South period, you have to surface Calhoun as a counterpoint to Jefferson and Madison, and then what does that mean for the country? Because they fundamentally sold the and I argued it at one point in the column I wrote that when Jefferson purchased Louisiana territory from Napoleon, he made a civil war almost inevitable because fundamentally, what was going to happen to everything west of the Alleghanies and east of the Mississippi was now in play. And you now had two competing dynamics.
and why that matters to us today is because we continue to believe that white folks act the way that they act because they don't know no better. This
Right,
is fundamentally what they think.
right.
They believe we are inferior. That's that is what the masses of white folks believe. And,
And
and,
we,
and for
and
us to
we,
continue to believe that they're going to one day wake up and know better is detrimental
Absurd.
to our mental and
It's
physical
absurd.
way. Yes, yes.
and that you can prove your humanity is even worse.
That you can't. That's so the whole point of the cornerstone speech. He goes right at Jefferson. He said Jefferson was wrong. God created this thing this way, and so and that's the bit. So for all them Bible thumping folks who think that Christianity is going to be the reason why white folks wake up and think, you know what, we've been treating black folks wrong. That is not going to happen because
And,
that is not how they use the Bible, and that's not how they see God, and that's not
and,
how they see our
and,
relationship to God.
and that's why you guys have heard me say this before. If I was gonna have a religion, I want to be looking for Moses, not waiting on Jesus. Okay,
I mean,
I I want the guy that told Moses, "Go on back to the crib, start packing your shit, and mark the door, cause me and my boy coming through tonight, and his ass is gonna invite you out of Europe out of Egypt after I'm done with him." Okay, and here's the other interesting thing about Exodus, how they told the story. Now, the way black folks would have told it is when he parted the Red Sea, that was the miracle, and we are at rescue, and then he closed it up so Pharaoh couldn't cross. No, the way they wrote the story, he parted the Red Sea, that was the miracle, and we got over. And then he left it open so Pharaoh could follow and he could drown his ass. So that was so why would you want that guy? Why would you want the guy that was light on Pharaoh after 400 years? Don't make sense. So look how other people tell their origin stories and how we struggle with ours trying to reconcile it for white folks to still in America to still be okay.
That continues to be our audience for some reason. It just
Man.
makes no sense that we don't have enough
one,
agency. Go ahead, Doc.
one last thing, Larry. And Mike, you are referencing, intuition and our, intuitiveness, uh, intuitiveness. A thing to consider there. If you were to engage in comparative, religious and spiritual systems and um and I'll say in traditional Africa, what you would find is that an aspect of the self is the ancestral self. However, the particular group conceptualizes it, they have an ancestral self. And so I've done more consistent study I've done on the Akan just because that was that's who the folks I was attached to here in Chicago were studying. But so they have a sense the African self is 4 points. It is the Accra, which is the God force, which is the ultimate, and the Moja, which is the mother, and the Intoro, which is the father, and the Sansun,
which
which
is the
is
sun.
the Sansun
The sun.
is the is the ancestral wisdom. It is
Mhm.
the ancestral part. And so many of us could take a step into um our health, our spiritual, physical, and mental well-being if we just simply accepted or explored the notion that what we have to this point been describing as our intuition, if we started to conceptualize that as our ancestral wisdom, because it too is a part of us.
And you
Me
know
too.
what? With that point, Charles and Larry, I'm gonna send you all the foreword on the book because we was talking about it and kind of had some breakthrough moments and stuff. And literally, that's the whole foundation.
Okay.
See, you've given me additional vocabulary, but the whole reason for the book is I have to answer to the ancestors one day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
And
I
and
have
and
to,
the- you know,
and I,
go ahead, Mike Jones.
no, I was gonna say, and I have to answer about, I have to be accountable for myself and what I did or didn't do, and what I taught and didn't, what I learned and didn't teach. I have to account for that, and that's foundational to all of this stuff. To really what I sent you guys earlier.
And it's antithetical to what's being taught in the Black church. They poo-poo veneration because they're individual to poo-poo venerations. And you saw that it continues to be a thing that peaks, uh, ongoingly because that was one of the strong points in Haitians' revolutionary fight and might. They relied on their ancestors and they called upon them. Yet and still, this criminal enterprise venerates their ancestors every step of the way. Every time you
Mm-hmm.
see a picture of Jefferson Davis, that's ancestral
Street names,
veneration, street
yes,
names, the
all of
whole
this
thing.
stuff,
I mean, and right here in St. Louis
institutions.
is ground zero. That is correct. Yet and still, we're taught that for us to do that puts individuals above God, and we're breaking one of the commandments, and it's foolishness. That's why we got to deconstruct this entire thing and rebuild. I want to thank you. What an outstanding. I can't. I mean, this is beyond a show. This was a class today that you all put on, and I thank you. And Mike, you talk about getting smarter. I ordered those. Obviously before the show was going to get out, so, used an apparatus I probably shouldn't have used, but I ordered those books, and I will be in study with those this week. I mean, actually, as they come. But I mean, the work of you guys is just incalculable, even for an attorney that can put a number on everything. So I want to thank you all again. Uh, and if it is the Lord will, we'll see you guys next week.